What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of True Crime and Cocktails. We're so glad that you're here. As always, I am your host, Lauren Ash, and as always, I am joined by my co-hostess with the mostess, Christy Oxborrow. How you feeling?
I'm doing great.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
I love to hear
Excited to
it.
be here.
Yeah.
This room is freezing, but I'm excited to be here.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay. I've been cranking the heat. As a
sure.
former person who runs hot, I
Hmm.
never used to crank the heat, and now I'm cold all the time. Um,
Yeah,
and so it's great to. I guess it's nice for me to feel what other people have felt all these years.
sure.
People without hormonal issues. Now that my hormones are normal, I'm like, oh, I feel
Oh,
cold. That's so
sure.
interesting.
Look, I know this makes me probably a lady of a certain age, but too
Sure.
late. I already am. Um, this also didn't need to be an announcement. I've started sleeping with socks.
I've always slept with socks.
I've never I've been my my pajama evolution has been fascinating. And
Your
by fascinating,
pajevolution, your
thank
pajevolution.
oh, thank you so much. And by fascinating, I mean not at all. It's not, no one would have a documentary about it. There's not a museum. Like there's just, it's not interesting at all. Um, but I spent decades where it was like random t-shirt, pajama pants. That was my go-to all the time. And then within the last 5 years, suddenly it was like, no, no, I have to have shorts. I can't do a full pajama pant in bed anymore. And now, shouldn't say this, now, no shorts at all and socks. And I've never been more comfortable in my life.
I
Now
love
I'm just
that.
like, let my legs out. But I'm
So
also like, but my feet need to be covered.
well, that makes sense to me somehow. I'll
Yeah.
tell you this, I've always worn socks to bed. I cannot fall asleep without socks on my feet. I've always been that way.
Oh, sure.
However, in the past, I always wake up and they're buried in the sheets. Like I somehow
Of
instinctively
course.
slide them off of myself in the night
Of course.
until recently. Now I'm wearing to bed a shirt, a sweatshirt, long pants, and long socks, and those socks stay on all night. And I'll also add, I have a
Hmm.
very heavy duvet, and the heat's on to 73,
Somehow,
sometimes 74.
somehow
Yeah.
we've crossed where you're like, I'm gonna layer up, and I'm
Right.
like, I'm layering down. But the
Yeah.
joke is, I gotta have the socks on. I've gotta have the socks burrowed in a corner of the blankets, and in the middle of the night, I need to just peek that foot out of the blankets because then somehow that's enough but I need the sock on so I'm not too chilled. There nights where I wake up and I'm like, Sahara Desert. It's never been hotter. Oh my God. And I'm like ripping the socks off and throwing them. Yeah. But I always still go back to socks for the start. If you think there's not a fresh pair of socks waiting in my bathroom so that I can put them on before I scuttle into bed after this record, because it's always got to be a fresh pair. It can't be the pair I've been walking around in, especially not a pair I've put my shoes into. My shoes
Oh.
into? My I've put into my shoes. There we go.
See, I'll also sleep with a slipper sock on now, depending.
Oh, that's a thick sock.
I'm telling you, it's a whole new world. It's a whole new
A
world.
new world. Yeah,
Don't you dare
I thought
close
we
your
were
eyes
I
or leave your
thought we
feet
were
bare.
I thought we were going for it. Yeah. You
Yeah.
know what? The other day I did comment, speaking of slippers, I made the comment, I just went, I think I should get a new pair of slippers. And then it was just silent. And my husband was like, how old are you? Like, what's happening to you? I'm like, I'm getting old. These floors are freezing in the winter.
Oh yeah.
I need to look into it. I also need a new pair of mittens, but that's neither here nor there. That was just more me using this as a memo for myself. If I ever hear it, Christy, go buy yourself mittens.
I'll remind you. I've been listening to
Thank you.
our banter every week. I've been having a rough time, folks. I've been going through a
Sure.
really tough time, and there's been times where I'm like, driving, and I'm like, what will make me feel better right now? And the answer is I listened to the beginning of our show.
I love it. Look, we hear all the time that people like the banter, and
Yeah.
I love to know that we're included in that.
Yeah. You know what I mean?
That's
Like,
nice.
yeah, it's not that I always do it. It's just I think in times where I'm like, when people talk about their comfort shows, I'm like, I guess my comfort show is my own. What a psycho.
You've got to have something to listen to between all the voice notes I sent you.
Today
You
was a
know,
full podcast length, which I loved.
today was my full podcast, which I've just entitled Rant.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because that's all it is. Like easily 90% is just like, this is my situation today. This
Yeah.
is what the battle is. They often end with just like, oh, there was the one the other day that ended with cheddar. Oh, fuck. And then it just cut off.
That was one of my favorite ones yet because I was like,
Yeah.
anything could have happened. Like it really is, it's impossible to know.
Yeah. Yeah. And when that was the moment, I was like, I have to immediately send something. Like, I have to immediately do, like, let you know. Like, she didn't just like somehow stab me with a knife or like, I'm not dead. She's not dead. Nothing's
Yeah.
like, it's fine. But yeah, she was just being such a nuisance.
Yeah. Listen,
She's really upped her nuisance game.
they've all got personalities.
They do.
Some are more of a menace than others.
They do. She is a full Dennis, which is a really old throwback, but
I
kids
loved
know who
Dennis the
Dennis the
Menace.
Menace. Like kids know who that is, right?
I think so.
I never really he was like a comic strip, right?
It was
And
a
maybe a
cartoon show
cartoon?
also.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I mostly recall him because he was for the longest time one of the mascots of Dairy Queen,
Yeah.
which is weird when you think about it.
Yeah. But I
And
like
then
that
of
Dairy Queen was like, we
yeah,
want to, we want to be represented by a rapscallion.
yeah. I love that the word rapscallion was used again because you
Yeah.
used it not long ago and I was so tickled.
It's one, you know what, I'll be honest. I pull out rapscallion a lot. I think it's a
I like
great
that.
word.
It is a great word.
Yeah.
And what's a better word to describe Dennis? Well, I mean, I guess menace, but
Yeah.
like
Other than menace, I would say. Yeah. Yeah.
other than
Yeah.
that, because Dennis the Rapscallion just doesn't have the same
Yeah. That was the first
same ring
comic
to
strip.
it.
It didn't sell as well. It didn't
Yeah,
sell as well. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
that checks out. But I am fascinated to know, like, why? Why was he chosen? Why did Dairy Queen go, you know, who's gonna sell ice cream? That little shit. Which is a less nice way of saying rapscallion. And then, well, actually, I don't know if it was before him or after him. They briefly had like little mascots. There was like a butterscotch beaver that, which it was like, I guess it was supposed to be like a Blizzard mascot, but it was
Okay.
like a little beaver and he had like a little name tag.
Okay.
I'm trying to think of who else there was. I only remember the beaver, possibly because I think that's the only one I had.
Right.
No one's asked. I'll look into it. It'll be on my next episode of Rant.
On the next episode of Rant,
Yeah. Oh, I
the
I
Dairy
can't wait.
Queen mascot questions answered. Yeah, I think that's
Yeah.
great.
Dairy Queen mascot Butterscotch Beaver, because that's the only one I remember.
Well,
Yeah. God, he's cute. 1986. Oh, but it's just all eBay's. Okay, well, first of all, I mean, that's a terrible photo of him, but I mean, he's very cute.
oh, he is cute. I don't remember this at all.
You don't? Oh, okay.
No.
Well, I had one of him, but I thought there was like a series of them. I mean, he's cuter than that.
Oh yeah, that's an ice cream cone with a man's face. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
chilling.
nobody needs that. Um,
It looks like the long lost cousin of the Michelin Man,
oh, I see that.
wearing a cone for pants.
Yeah, it just feels unnatural.
It's not necessary. It's not
Oh, I wonder
necessary.
if Butterscotch beep. Well, the Butterscotch Sunday was at the same time as Dennis the Menace.
Yeah.
So I wonder if that's why they brought it out. I don't know. I just remember there being blushes, but I can't remember. Yes, because I had this guy too. marshmallow mousse.
Oh, cute.
And then it's like, was that it?
Was he all white?
I'm trying, well, missed opportunity. I'm trying to
Yeah.
see a photo of it and oh God, images. You'd think I'd know how to use a phone by this stage of the game, but I barely do. Well, I guess we're just going. I'm just gonna be lazy and type mousse and hope for the best. There we go. There's marshmallow mousse.
Okay, so there's white elements on him.
Not
He's
a
cute.
lot
He's
for
cute.
marshmallow, but because I definitely have him and butterscotch somewhere. But I thought it was like a whole series of them, but maybe I'm wrong. I'm gonna need to do a bigger deep dive. But then there's these stickers. Who the hell is this chimp?
Chocolate chimp? Yeah, I don't know.
And also, this looks nothing like the plush.
That's also not how you spell marshmallow.
Oh, I know. Have to believe they tried to take liberties. They tried to take liberties.
Well, I don't know that they tried. I think they just did.
They just did.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, I remember Dennis the Menace so much being like mascot in there. And I never questioned it. I question it now, but I never questioned it at the time.
Yeah.
But yeah, I wasn't a consumer of Dennis the Menace.
Sure. I
Dairy
was.
Queen, yes,
I
but
was. I watched the Dennis the Menace cartoon every day.
sure.
Yeah.
I feel like it might be safe to say I think you did cartoons more than I did.
It's possible. I watched a lot of cartoons for sure. Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
there were a lot of cartoons I loved, but I feel you watched more than I did.
Well, I also remember in the summer times, I also watched I Love Lucy and Price is Right every day. So
Sure.
again, it was a bit of a mixed
Oh,
bag, let's be honest.
Price is Right.
Oh.
Yeah. Keeping in mind, I wasn't being negative about
No, I didn't
cartoons.
think you
I
were.
just because I feel your vast knowledge of cartoons far surpasses mine.
Well, that's kind. I think 80s cartoons, maybe. I think that that's probably where I shine. Other than when we start getting more modern and I grew up, I dipped out. But yeah, 80s cartoons, I do
Oh,
feel like I have a
sure.
pretty good knowledge of. Yeah.
Oh, of course. I mean, I watched a lot as a kid, but I would say I've definitely seen more now because I happen to be in the room while my children watch them.
Right.
Because it's like they're currently going through Steven Universe, which is weird upon weird. Phineas and Ferb was a big one for a while. They binged all of Bluey just because they needed a quick show for the morning.
Mm,
And it's like, but Bluey's heavy, I guess more as an adult when you're watching it and they're teaching you things every day. But yeah, I've seen a lot of stuff. I've also tried so hard to get them to like some of the older stuff, but it just never really hit.
yeah. Well, you can lead a horse to water, but you
It's
can't
true.
make him watch your cartoons.
If I could make a horse watch cartoons, I mean, my God, what would I make it watch?
Scooby Doo.
Oh, Scooby-Doo
I don't
runs
know why.
very in a horse-like fashion.
The real answer is My Little Pony.
Oh my God, how did I not even think about that? My Little Pony was big for me.
Yeah, same.
My Little Pony and Care Bears were like
Yeah.
the ultimate. I wanted to live with them. I wanted to eat whatever pies Grams was going to make. I was just going to live in Care-a-Lot and drive in a cloud car, and that was just going to be my existence. And then I grew up and realized that's not a real place, and it's just been downhill ever since.
Yeah, it is interesting that as little kids you get so many dreams that you build and then part of growing up is just watching all of those dreams slowly be demolished, you know?
Yeah. Oh, I think maybe if we learned anything about me and my numerous dreams,
Hmm,
maybe when one dies, I just shove it down and I just put a new dream on top of it so I don't remember all of these dreams that I had that were like, oh, that was never gonna happen.
maybe. Maybe deep down you're just a dream onion. So many layers.
That's so much nicer than the dream graveyard, I was gonna say.
Oh God. Well, speaking of graveyards, I love that that's my transition.
Oh, oh,
No, listen, I just wanted to take a quick minute and I'm not going to belabor it because I don't want to cry on the show. It's been a long time since I've cried on the show and I don't want today to be the day. But I do feel like, as we talk about on this show, there are certain people that are characters in our universe. There's
of course.
the people and the beings, I guess I should say, that are all a part of the True Crime and Cocktails family. And of course, we did lose one of my favorite members, which of course is my dog Fox. He passed away last week. I've been alluding on the show that I've been going through a very hard time, which is for a variety of reasons, but one of the big ones is, of course, his very sad decline. Um, if you are an OG listener of the show, you'll remember, if you're a patron, especially, I think it was over on Patreon. I talked about it. I believe it was summer of 2021. He went into congestive heart failure, and the doctors gave him
Right?
6 months to live. And he defied the odds. We've got an extra chunk of years together, which is beautiful. But his passing has been extremely difficult for me, and yeah, he's very missed. The house feels very empty. It's wild
Of
that a 10
course.
pound dog can have such a massive presence. But Sharky and Bean have been all over me. I think that they're sensing that something's happened. I think they're sensing that he's not here. But yeah, we just have to give the old man a shout out as he's due. It's the end of an era, and I can't continue to talk or I'll cry. So there we go.
Yeah.
Ooh, I made it
10,
through.
10-pound dog with a 50-pound attitude.
Oh God, yeah.
I'll never
Oh
forget
God,
our
yeah.
first meeting and that side eye from across the room
Yep,
because it was like, I don't know her.
yep.
Like you could feel it. And
Oh,
then,
he was grumpy. He was judgy. He
yep,
was a
yep.
curmudgeon. He's the greatest. I mean, I love it. He had such a
Yeah.
absolutely clear personality. And I mean, they
Oh,
all do.
yes.
Again, like we were saying, they all have a clear personality, but his is like so funny. Because he was just a very particular, regal gentleman, very dignified.
Yeah.
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 If he was done walking, he'd lay down, for example, on the walk. Like he was a very,
Oh, same.
yeah. But
I
yeah, my
kid,
heart
I
is,
don't walk.
and I know that it may sound like I'm being non-emotional. The truth is that I'm so emotional that I have
Of
completely numbed out.
course.
So my heart is broken. Like please make no mistake, that it's, truly destroyed me. It's devastating. And I know we have a lot of animal lovers on this, that listen to this show, so I know that I'm in good company. But yeah, I just had to take a moment. And now, as Christy likes to do, the dark and then the light. We have to very briefly talk about my favorite topic of current, which is Luigi Mangione. Is it
Of
Mangione or
course.
is it Mangione? I don't know.
I
I don't
think it
know.
depends on what your flavor is. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
if you want to put a little stank on it, you can, I
right,
think. I don't know.
right. Well, listen, we talked about it last week on the show, and I think the thing that's difficult about us talking about this case on the show is that it's updating at a fever pitch. It's updating so
Rapid pace.
quickly that we literally recorded last Saturday for Tuesday, which is a very short. We usually have a few more days,
Yes.
but it was very short, and it was our information was outdated in 3 days. Like by the time the episode came out, there had been so many updates. So again, as of now, I mean, we can give further update, but if you're following the case at all, it's more than possible that by the time this episode drops, there will have been
Oh, there's going to be so much more. I'm
so
sure of
much
it.
more. But the big things that I think are worth mentioning are he was arrested in this
Yeah.
McDonald's. Um, he's been charged with second-degree murder, which I think is very interesting to bring up because this crime, if we are to believe it was as premeditated as they want us to believe,
Right.
um, I'm interested as to how it would be a second-degree murder charge as opposed to a first-degree murder charge. I think that that's interesting.
Right.
Um, his lawyer, who is a character, and like clips from press conferences he's holding are coming up in my TikTok feed, and I could not be happier. He's like
Of
lawyering
course.
so hard, like it's just everything you want the theater of law to be, if that makes any
Of
sense. Like
course.
any question he gets asked, he's spinning. Like it's truly
I
it's
mean, I mean, I don't know the age of this person, but I'll say it. This is probably the case of his career.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. He's an older gentleman, and I think that he
Mhm.
knows that. I think that he knows that. Because they'll ask him like, what was Luigi's health like, both mental and physical? And he's like, well, I'm not a medical doctor, I'm a lawyer, and I'm here to only talk about law. And I was like, I just love that every answer he's just like keeping it on track, keeping it on track.
Good
But
for him.
the other thing I wanted to talk about very quickly is he keeps saying he's like, well, my client's been charged, but there's no real evidence. Like, show me the evidence. And here's what I have to say about that. In a sense, he's really right because there's a lot that's circumstantial. I understand that there,
Mhm.
was this footage of this masked person who we have the footage of him shooting Brian Thompson. But as far
Sure.
as I know, we have no footage of the front of him. And we also know he was wearing a mask. So that's one thing to note that it's like, well, you don't have like the smoking gun of having images of his face
Right.
committing this crime in the moment. Um, and then the other thing I've been reading about is the 3D printed gun, if that is what he used. Apparently, these are super illegal because they're all identical. So, unlike normal handguns that have serial numbers, that have the very specific,
Right.
how they'll pull ballistics. We've seen this in film and television
Yeah.
because everyone has their own specific fingerprint that they leave on a casing on a bullet,
Right.
right? Well, the 3D printed ones don't. So there's no way to determine which specific gun committed a crime by ballistics. It doesn't exist anymore. So
No.
one could argue in a court of law that it's like, well, sure, my client had a 3D printed gun, but there's no way to prove that that was the 3D printed gun that committed the crime. So I was like, I
Oh,
started to get like, I mean, as everybody knows, I'm my first and foremost is psychology. I'm always
of
fascinated by the
course.
psychology of crimes. The second is a very near second, which is lawyering. I am fascinated. We talk about it on the show all the time that it's like it doesn't matter what the truth is, it's what you can prove. And that is for better or
Right.
for worse, right? Again, the justice system is set up in a way to try and protect people, and consequently there's some real theatrics that can happen in courtrooms, and all I'm saying is that pass the popcorn because I'm fascinated to find out what happens. Last thing,
Yeah.
I saw someone bring this up in a TikTok, which I thought was actually a really good point. There was, and I don't know who the creator was, or I would shout them out, but it was a person who has done a fair amount of prison time, and his insights were
Sure.
like really great. I was like, as someone who's been through the system, et cetera, I was like, okay, this
Of
guy's
course.
got his finger on the pulse. And this was one point he brought up that I thought was great. There's a very large possibility that they're going to try and not allow this case to go to trial because, as we know,
Right.
it's like, how are you going to find a jury that's not biased? How are you going to find a jury that doesn't want to, necessarily let him off? The jury nullification thing has come up, which is, of course, when a jury knows that someone is guilty, but then chooses to find them innocent anyway. This is something that can happen,
Right.
real thing. So to avoid that, this guy's point was like, there's a very large possibility that they will try and get him to take a deal so that it doesn't go to trial.
Right.
And because they know that it's like it's really dicey if it goes to trial, he could potentially get a really good deal because his side can be like, you don't have where's your all your what is your evidence? How much do
Right.
you have that's actually physically tying him to the place and the crime, etc. Um,
Right.
I mean, they haven't even released the full manifesto that they found. So it's also the question of like, does he say in the manifesto, I am going to kill Brian Thompson on said day? Or is he just talking generally? Because again, as we know, it's not what's true, it's what you can prove. So
Right.
I just think, again, like this is going to get far more interesting as it enters the judicial system. And I think there is a very large possibility that part of the reason they charged him with second degree versus first degree is that they're like they're going to be feeling hard pressed to potentially get the conviction that they want. Again, this is all
Right.
speculation. It's my favorite topic. Again, this is like Christy and the Submersible. I am so invested in this case
Hmm.
on every level. I just find it fascinating.
Oh, I'm fascinated by the fact that it's only been a week.
I know
Like since this, like when we
it's been less
recorded the
than a
last
week.
one. Yeah, when we recorded the last one, it was like it was up in the air. It was the rumor was that wasn't the shooter in the photo. And then I think like the next day after we recorded that, it was like, this is his name. Here's his thirst trap, which also, if I may, how many people in the history of like, even, if since like news where like the second somebody does something wrong, their face is all over the place. How many people have potentially, allegedly, murdered somebody? Like, how many murder suspects have ever just had thirst trap photos posted on the news? Because they're like, normally it's like, here's this like ragged picture of this person, but they're like, oh hey, guess what? 20 abs. Here he is in like a jungle. Look at that, topless. Like, I'm just, it's like the media is like, well, give the people what they want. Like, it feels
Well,
like the media is like, we'd rather look at that than, it's
oh,
just wild to me that I feel they're really being generous with
well, I
the
think they've
photos of his they're posting.
for sure. I think, well, I think the other problem is maybe he doesn't take a bad photo. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like
That is possible.
they can only work with what they have. Um,
You're
but I
right.
do think I agree with you that they're turning into the swerve. Like the amount of times they've been posting those shirtless photos. And listen, I'll say it. It's
We're not
it's
bad.
it's impressive. Like what he was doing there is impressive, especially because we know he had a very like a degenerative spinal disease now that was like,
Sure.
caused him to have spinal surgery and all these things. I just think it's amazing that somebody that was potentially in chronic constant lower back pain was able to get that many abs.
Oh, I didn't even think that many abs were possible.
Yeah. No.
But it's amazing to me how often that's the photo they choose to post.
Yes. Yes, of course.
When it's like, well, I mean, there is like an arrest photo you could like a an actual mugshot
Right.
you could
Well,
post.
someone else, I saw someone else made a video. Again, I apologize for not knowing who it was to credit, but there was a very good point someone was making that was like, have you noticed that it appears like there's just full photo shoots happening with him in prison right now? Like there isn't just the one mugshot. There's like
Yeah.
18 different ones. And it's like, are cops just taking these on their cell phones and releasing them? Like, how do we have like a full body shot, an over the shoulder, the traditional mug shot, him entering the court, him leaving the
Yeah.
court, him in another outfit. Like there's been multiple wardrobe changes. It's like, have they hired a personal photographer for Luigi? Because first of all, great idea.
Yeah.
But second of all, it's like, what's going on over there?
Oh, it's a full on like Sears photo shoot. The next thing it'll be one of those like his hand, like he'll be laying on his stomach with his knees in the air with his little hands resting on his or his face resting on his hands. Just like classic 90s pose. I'm ready for those to come out because I'm sure they exist. Um, it's also so wild the amount of people on the internet who are like, set him free,
Yeah,
set him free. And it's like, Jesus, that is wild. And also the whole thing about the McDonald's employee who called
right.
to tell police, like, hey, I think he's here. And they were supposed to get like a 50 or $60,000 reward, and they're getting screwed out of the reward.
Right, because the person didn't call the tip line,
Yeah, they
they
called
called
911.
911. So,
And it's
yeah.
like, what a fucking technicality. And it's like, if that person knew they weren't getting a reward for it, would they still have called?
It's a great question.
Because I think that's extra bullshit to be
Well, it
like, we're
also
not,
proves the point of the potential crime. Now, again, innocent till proven guilty. But if
of
we are to
course.
believe that this person committed this crime, the whole thing is about how the rich get richer and keep the sick sicker and all of these things. And it's like, it's kind of a microcosm of the same thing that it's like, well, you didn't do it exactly how we told you to. So we're not going to give you that money, actually. Like, it's just like a
Right?
healthcare company denying a claim. Like, it just feels like, I think we're in the wildest timeline. I'm not going to get into
Yeah,
it, but I'm just like, what is happening? This is wild. The other thing, update, and you're going to love that I feel like this is worth noting. I
of
saw today
course.
that, of course, because every bit of information that's coming, like everyone wants everything about this case. And
Yes.
so one of the things that came out was that it's like, what's he eating in prison? As though it matters. And by the way,
We've
is it
never asked.
is it because his body's so good? Like, why are we suddenly? I don't remember ever in history, other than when they've done those specials about like death row meals, which I'm fascinated by because you can
Of course.
historically, not in all states anymore, people who are about to be executed can choose their last meal. And I'm fascinated by that. But this isn't that. I don't think I've ever, as somebody again who ingests a lot of true crime, I don't remember ever hearing like, what's the menu being served to this person in prison. But again, I feel like it has to be because we keep seeing him shirtless. And McDonald's is also a player in this story. So it's like, well, we know he likes
Oh,
to cheat
sure.
sometimes and he still has those abs. Anyway, the choices for dinner:
Yeah.
chicken parmesan or pizza beans.
Okay, a couple of questions.
I,
What's
yep.
a pizza bean?
Well, and here's the thing. If you Google pizza beans, there's
Yeah.
so many headlines that are like, is Luigi Mangione going to finally make pizza beans mainstream? So I guess it's a real thing. I have never heard of pizza beans. Um, so I've pulled up a pizza beans recipe because I have no
Oh,
idea.
thank God. Yep.
I have no idea. Now, of course, I'm gonna have to scroll for 18 minutes as this person tells their life story about their personal connection
Oh,
to pizza beans and how to make it.
let's
Okay.
change recipes, shall we?
Yeah, exactly. My God. Okay. 2 cans, cannellini or butter beans,
Sure.
olive oil, dried oregano, baby spinach, marinara, cheese.
Oh,
So
so
I
just
guess,
beans flavored with pizza, I guess. Like pizza flavored beans.
yeah, I guess
Oh.
so.
I
Yeah,
guess
okay, so you like
that's
cook the
the
spinach and onions and then you add the beans. Um, okay. And you add the marinara and then you put the skillet in the oven. You put the cheese on top. Yeah.
so basically that feels like the vegetarian option to the chicken parm.
I also want to say and I hope that all prisons have vegetarian options, but I guess I would just
I
be surprised. I don't know.
I would be shocked if all prisons served chicken parm. I don't even serve chicken parm in my home. Mainly because in my mind it's too upscale and I can't be bothered.
So pizza beans are a dish made with white beans, tomato sauce, and cheese. You can add other ingredients like peppers, mushrooms, olives, pepperoni, ham, or artichokes. Okay. You can also top a pizza with beans.
No, thank you.
No thanks.
If
Anyway,
if you're having pizza, have pizza. Don't ruin it.
well, again, I mean, listen, I'm not opposed to trying pizza beans. It
I
feels like
just
I'll say it, and I want to preface this by saying what I'm about to say is not a criticism. It sounds kind of
sure.
like a slop meal, and slop meals are one
Oh,
of my favorite things. Like I like just like a
yep.
pile of slop. You know what I mean?
We recently discussed slot meals.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
what I'm saying is it might be up my alley.
I just find it fascinating that the fact that it happens to be something served in the jail where he is or whatever, how that makes him the one who's like gonna put it on the map. And it's like, I don't like, he's not screaming from the rooftops about the beautiful thing that is pizza beans. Like, he's not.
No. Also, by the way, we don't know what he selected. I think there's a
Great
large
call.
possibility he took the chicken parm because I mean maybe he has
Protein.
experienced pizza beans. I don't know, but again, I felt like that was in again in just what is another turn in the strangest story in the strangest timeline. Pizza beans was not on my bingo card for 2024.
Yeah, there's so many words, and it's just, look, again, I feel like 2024 is trying so hard to be fucking weird. And I feel like it's gotten to this point where the year realizes it's almost up.
Yeah.
And it's like, how historical are you going to be? Are you going to step up and be even weirder? Or are we going to let it go? And this is going to be it with pizza beans and submersible. And that's going to be it for the year. And it's like, I think it's seeing the end of the year and going, I can do better. And then it was like pizza beans. And we're like, what?
This story brought to you by Pizza Beans. Hey, do you like hot cheese? Do you like marinara? Do you like the goodness of something that makes you fart? We've got the dish for you. It's Pizza Beans.
I also, I mean, I said chicken parm because it's protein. I guess beans are protein as well, right?
Yeah.
So either way, they're getting a protein.
I'm also curious, is this the meal choice for everyone in the prison? Is he getting a special meal because I'm assuming that he's in segregation of some kind.
Oh my God, is he a favorite? Are they like, shh, get him the, get him
Well, this was a
Happy Meal?
printed menu that someone had found. Like, there's apparently something online. I don't, again, I just find it fascinating that the first time in history I think we've ever talked about somebody newly in prison and what they're eating, it's this man. And I think it has to be to do with with his body. Maybe I'm wrong, but or maybe it's the fact that he's Italian and they're offering him Italian things. I don't know.
Oh, I think this might be one of the first times in known history where someone is arrested for a severe crime and the majority of the public is like, I'm on his side.
Yeah, it's like a
And so it's,
nonpartisan thing. Yeah, it's
yeah,
like people on
again,
both sides are going like, well, we don't like the healthcare CEOs, so
yeah. And they're like, look at how good he is. Valedictorian or whatever he was, went to an Ivy League school, like all of these impressive things. And people are just like, oh no.
well, it's interesting too because Ben Shapiro went on a rant, as Ben Shapiro is known to do, and
Yes, he did.
he was saying, "How dare people celebrate Brian Thompson's death? Like this is so disgusting." But the
Sure,
comments, because again, he does traditionally, obviously, play to a pretty far right audience. The
sure.
comments from his audience were like, "You're off the mark, man." So it was interesting because now Candace Owens, for example, another very right wing
Right.
pundit, she I saw did a whole thing where she was giving what we would consider the more left view or the view that most people are having, which is like, we can't be surprised that this happened when this is what's happening with corporate greed. And I was like, how do I feel like I'm agreeing with something Candace Owens is saying. I was like, this feels interesting and weird in my body. It's
Yeah.
like, it's just interesting to me that again, it does feel like it's the great equalizer. I did also hear this morning, and I don't know if this is true yet. I haven't fact checked it, but there is also some legislation that's been coming through kind of in reference to this about the healthcare system. Um, so it's basically yes, okay, yes. I'm just making sure the New York Times has reported this, so I'm not misspeaking. But basically, what they want to do is create this law to break up a healthcare company, from being the insurance and being the provider. Now, I might be
Oh,
bastardizing this, but for example, it's like United Health has a pharmacy inside of the corporation. So the reason why
right.
that's a problem is because then they can price things where they want them to be,
Right.
right, and then deny them. Like it's this whole the calls coming from inside the house. Like it's cheap. So the
Right.
whole point is that it's like it's a conflict of interest. They should not be these conglomerates that are owning every aspect of healthcare, because I don't need to explain to you why that's, obviously a problem. So yeah, so I'm seeing that this is now, it feels like this could be a response in part. So I mean also that's an interesting thing to think about too, right? Is that it's like this person did this thing, which whether or not we agree with the action or not, whether or not we condone the violence or not, it's interesting that now it's like becoming a potentially making change.
I'm deeply fascinated.
I'm fascinated by it. The whole thing. The whole thing. Anyway,
Yeah. Well,
we got to get into it. We got to get into it. We got so much to talk about. This isn't just a Luigi Mangione podcast. Oh, we're talking this week, of course, of the Into the Fire, The Lost Daughter. This is the documentary that is on Netflix. Now, I was riveted by this documentary. If
oh
you,
yeah.
if you haven't watched it, highly recommend, but do not worry because we're also going to give you all the information right now. And if you need some backstory, I'll get you up to speed right like this. When Kathy Turkanian was a teenager, she gave her baby up for adoption. So when the adoption agency reached out to Kathy 35 years later, she assumed that her biological daughter was looking to connect. Sadly, it turned out that the agency was trying to find Kathy so that she could provide a DNA sample to compare to the body of a Jane Doe found in Wisconsin. Kathy learned that her daughter had gone missing 21 years prior, and not only was her case unsolved, but it also seemed like her case was just never investigated to begin with. When Kathy's DNA did not match Jane Doe, Kathy started a decade-long journey to discover what happened to her actual daughter. So, what happened to Kathy's daughter? Who was responsible? How was it not investigated? And what was the real identity of the Wisconsin Jane Doe? Christy Oxborrow investigates.
Folks, this is going to get rough.
Yeah, it's a tough story.
For anyone who has not seen the documentary or heard the story, this will get rough.
Yeah.
One thing I didn't mention in my notes, but I was fascinated by one of the executive producers of that documentary, Charlize.
Theron?
Yeah,
What Theron? Who? No, Lauren. No. Theron? What's wrong with me? That was genuine. I want you to know that was earnest.
I know,
Theron?
which is why I
My
could not
God.
have loved it more. You'll also love that I was scared to say the last name myself, partially because I was like, some people say it's like Throne, some say Theron, some say Theron. Like it's just I didn't want to get like an oh she fucked up that name. Plus I felt she's kind of like Cher. Like you could say
Oh,
Charlize
yeah.
and everyone's like, well, they know what stunning creature you're talking about, which is like you say Cher, we know what stunning creature we're talking about.
Of course. I think in this case, it is important for us to put the last name on it only because I don't want people confused with the giant squishmallow I have that's also named Charlize, who may be dabbling in film production. I don't know.
I forgive me because I didn't even consider the vast world of squishmallows when I thought of the names. Again, Squishmallow, we don't have time, but
No, we
like
got to get into it.
learning about learning that they give backstories for each of
Yeah,
these characters is so heartwarming.
I love it.
I live for it. So, again, this is going to get rough, but look, it's our last like crime centric
Yes.
episode of the season of the year. Well, not of the season. I meant of the holiday season. Of the year. We went all out, I guess. So disclaimer, this episode will contain mentions of rape, child abuse, and child sexual assault. So trigger warning for those who need it. Kathy Turkanian met her husband Ed at a bar in New Orleans in 1991. At the time, Kathy was a nurse, but weeks later, she quit her job, rented a U-Haul, and moved to Massachusetts with Ed. Along the way, they stopped at a chapel in Virginia to get married just 10 weeks after they first met. And while that may be shocking to some, as of this record, Kathy and Ed are still together to this day, 33 years later.
How beautiful.
And honestly, so beautiful, right? According to Kathy, about a month into their marriage, she told Ed that when she was 16, she had a baby. The child was born June 23rd, 1974, and named Alexis Miranda Badger. Sadly, Kathy struggled being a parent as her own mother was abusive towards her and gave Kathy absolutely no support. So when Alexis was 9 months old, Kathy's mother pressured Kathy into giving Alexis up for adoption. She said that Alexis would be given a much better life than what Kathy could provide and continually told Kathy she didn't know what she was doing. So, a couple of things right out the gate. Kathy was 16 at the time, so no, she didn't know what she was doing. But as a mother, I can honestly say none of us know what we're doing. Some may have more experience than others, but every child is different. For example, I had one kid who was colicky for the first year and a half of his life. I had another, barely made a peep. And then the third was kind of in the middle. And honestly, there are just so many times throughout the past nearly 20 years that I've been a parent where I've had no idea what I was doing. And I truly believed along the way that I was really royally fucking things up. Because at the end of the day, parenting is hard. You're always tired. On some level, you're always worried. Are they eating enough vegetables? Are they eating too much candy? Do they get enough exercise? Are they socializing with people their own age enough? Do they actually brush their teeth or are they just half assing it? Are they being safe on the internet? Are they being kind and using manners when I'm not around? When is the last time they actually bathed? Is 13 too young to watch the movie Scream? It's never ending. Yes, those are all things I think about a lot.
Of course.
But don't get me wrong, parenting is a beautiful thing, and I'm very fortunate to have had the opportunity. I'm not trying to scare anyone out of it. I'm just saying parenting is hard, especially when the parent is still a child themselves and has absolutely no support system. I can only assume that giving a child up for adoption is incredibly hard, especially when the parent is a teenager whose emotions are all over the place to begin with. Alexis was placed in foster care in January 1975 when she was about 7 months old. She was adopted 2 months later, but since it was a closed adoption, Kathy legally wasn't allowed any information about her daughter. Cut to 35 years later, in March 2010, Kathy received a letter from the adoption agency based in Norfolk, Virginia. Kathy said that she assumed that Alexis was looking to connect. However, in the letter, Kathy learned that a Jane Doe had been discovered in a cornfield in Wisconsin, and police believed there was a possibility that the Jane Doe was Kathy's daughter, Alexis. Therefore, police were looking to speak with Kathy about getting a DNA sample to help determine Jane Doe's real identity. Kathy, of course, immediately provided a sample. Thankfully, it was determined that Jane Doe was not Kathy's daughter, but this was the moment when Kathy learned her daughter had been missing. However, due to the closed adoption, the agency could not tell her her daughter's new name or any details about her disappearance. So Kathy's husband, Ed, goes to a missing persons website online, searches for missing girls with the same birthday as Alexis, and pretty much immediately gets a hit for a girl who had been missing from Michigan since March 1989. It turns out that Alexis's new name was Andrea Michelle Bowman. So to spare any confusion, I'm just going to refer to her as Andrea for the rest of the episode. So Kathy and Ed learned that Andrea was last seen when she was just 14 years old, and that from the looks of it, no one had been looking for her. Unfortunately, Kathy couldn't find any more information about Andrea or her adoptive parents, so Kathy started a Facebook page called Find Andrea M. Bowman. Almost immediately, she started receiving messages from people who went to high school with Andrea. Kathy learned that Andrea had been adopted in March 1975 by a couple named Brenda and Dennis Bowman. Brenda and Dennis were high school sweethearts who got married in 1971 in Michigan. Dennis was in the Navy, so he was stationed in San Diego for 6 months in 1970 before being transferred to Norfolk in 1971. Brenda was told that she would have trouble conceiving, so she chose to adopt, which is when they met Andrea. The family remained in Virginia for a few years before moving to the small town of Hamilton, Michigan. In 1987, Brenda discovered she was pregnant, and that December, she gave birth to a daughter, Vanessa Joy Bowman. Friends and family said that Andrea, who was 13 at the time, was absolutely in love with her baby sister and often took care of her, including feeding and changing diapers. Andrea was described as outgoing, funny, and a people person who was eager to fit in. But Dennis said that around the age of 12 or 13, it was like someone flipped a switch. According to him, Andrea started shoplifting, lying, buying drugs at school, and running away from home. Dennis and Brenda became concerned and took Andrea to counselors, but nothing seemed to help. On the afternoon of March 11th, 1989, Dennis picked Andrea up from school and brought her home. He took Brenda to work. They took the baby with them because they said Andrea had homework and they didn't want her to use the baby as an excuse for not getting her work done. Dennis returned home around 6:30 p.m. He said the house was unlocked, so he walked in and laid the baby on the couch. Dennis went upstairs looking for Andrea when he noticed the door to the main bedroom, which was normally locked, was open and the lock appeared to be broken. Dennis said that an envelope full of cash was missing from a bedroom dresser, so he assumed that Andrea had left, taking the money and even the contents of the baby's piggy bank with her. Dennis called the police, but Andrea was nowhere to be found. When Brenda got home from work at 11:30 p.m., she drove around looking for Andrea, but found no sign of her. Over the next few weeks, there were alleged sightings of Andrea at a roller rink and a grocery store in Michigan, as well as at a strip club in Indiana, but there was never concrete proof that it was actually her, and the trail went cold. So, how do we get from a missing girl in Hamilton, Michigan in March 1989 to a Jane Doe in Raymond, Wisconsin in July 1999? Well, because of an armchair detective named Carl. Carl Koppelman is an accountant living in California who voluntarily works as a digital forensic artist in his spare time. In 2009, Carl became interested in true crime when he came across the site Web Sleuths. Around this time, Carl found that police reconstructions of unidentified remains just weren't lifelike enough to be able to make a positive ID. So he used computer software to try and create a better picture. The first time Carl attempted this was in 2006 after a John Doe, was found in the basement of a motel in Philadelphia. Thanks to Carl's help, John Doe was eventually identified. Carl, who is mostly self-taught, has since created more than 250 portraits. So far, Carl has been pivotal in solving at least 13 cases. Carl not only created the facial reconstruction photo of the Wisconsin Jane Doe, but he also searched through a missing persons spreadsheet to match Jane Doe to a list of potential victims. One of the names on that list was Andrea Bowman. But since it turned out that Andrea was not Jane Doe, I'm going to give you a somewhat brief overview of who Jane Doe was. Because
Please.
the documentary never got into it, and maybe it's because it would just add so much more sadness. So we're doing it with a Wisconsin Jane Doe side note.
Love it.
Jane Doe's body was found in a cornfield on the side of the road in Raymond, Wisconsin on July 21st, 1999. Trigger warning, this is particularly brutal. So, according to the autopsy, there were signs that the victim struggled or suffered long-term horrific abuse, including burns and blunt force trauma to much of her body, cuts and abrasions to her head, a broken nose, broken ribs, and a left ear that was so badly injured it was described as what wrestlers call a cauliflower ear. The victim also showed signs of being malnourished and sexually abused. The cause of death was ruled homicide by sepsis pneumonia as a result of infection from injuries sustained from chronic abuse. A detective who worked the case said, quote, "The utter barbaric brutality inflicted on this young woman is something we'll never forget." Since there was no way to identify Jane Doe, she was buried in an unmarked grave until October 2013, when her body was exhumed for isotope analysis, which allowed for DNA testing. And after years of searching, investigators finally found a match to a family member who the victim had never met. In November 2019, Jane Doe was finally identified as 23-year-old Peggy Lynn Johnson. After the death of her father and brother, Peggy, who was cognitively impaired, lived alone with her mother. But after her mother died when Peggy was just 18, Peggy found herself without housing. So she went to a medical clinic in McHenry, Illinois for help. There she met a nurse named Linda LaRoche, who insisted on taking Peggy into her home, where Peggy agreed to work as a housekeeper and nanny in exchange for room and board. Peggy's body was discovered on the side of the road 5 years later. And since Peggy's mother was dead, no one was looking for her, which is why she was never reported missing. The most that anyone seemed to reach out was an aunt apparently placed an ad in a newspaper in December 1999 asking for Peggy to contact her, but she never heard anything. In September 2019, police received an anonymous tip that Linda had told multiple people that she killed a woman while living in Illinois. When police spoke to Linda's children, they said that Linda horribly abused Peggy. They
Oh,
said their mother was verbally and emotionally cruel to her. When Peggy wasn't working, Linda made her sleep in a crawl space under the house. So Linda's just basically a completely vile woman, I
yeah.
guess. Linda's ex husband said the last time he saw Peggy, he found her lying unconscious on the ground. Linda told him Peggy had overdosed and that she was going to take her out of the house so they wouldn't be involved. Firstly, if this is true, Linda was a nurse and she could have done something to help a girl that's passed out. Secondly, he was just okay with his wife bringing a random minor into their house in the first place. And thirdly, after Linda mysteriously took Peggy out of the house and she never returned, there was no part of the husband that got suspicious about that. When police spoke to Linda, she outright admitted to abusing Peggy, but said it was because Peggy would steal her medication and bring random men to the house. Mm-hmm. When Peggy allegedly passed out, Linda said, quote, I thought about calling an ambulance, but didn't.
Ugh.
Linda said that she decided that she didn't want to deal with Peggy anymore. So when Peggy woke up, Linda took her to a phone booth at a nearby gas station where Peggy called her grandmother, who picked her up. But then the police pointed out that they spoke with Peggy's grandmother, um, and she said that absolutely never happened. So Linda admitted she didn't know what happened to Peggy because the last time she saw her, she left Peggy on the side of the road in a rural area. Linda was adamant that Peggy was not physically injured in any way at the time. If that was true, though, why didn't you come forward when the police were trying to identify Peggy's body? That's a
Yep.
question I also have for the ex husband. Linda was eventually found guilty of first-degree intentional homicide and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. What an absolute vile piece of shit. And I hope Linda rots. That's where I'm at with that.
Yep.
Oh, and just to clarify, the missing persons spreadsheet that Carl used to compile the list, it is a searchable document which contains 19,000 names with information indexed 13 different ways. Oh, and Carl absolutely created the whole thing himself. Look, what I'm saying is he's an impressive man. And
When you said it was
my
indexed that
love
many
of
ways, I thought you were going to just say it gets got you hot because it was
I
not the
almost did.
subject matter, but more of just, the
The
methodology used to,
the impressive spreadsheet making,
yeah,
I can appreciate impressive
yeah.
spreadsheets. I mean, well done, Carl, is what I'm saying. So in 2010, when investigators first believed that Wisconsin Jane Doe might be Andrea Bowman, it was the first time that Andrea's case had been looked at in decades. And when Jane Doe was officially identified, the cold case unit continued to investigate Andrea's disappearance. They even contacted the Bowmans to say that Andrea's case was being actively looked at again. Although, to be fair, doesn't seem like it was actively looked at when it first happened.
Ugh.
When the police started reinvestigating the case, Kathy Turkanian started that Facebook page, hoping to gather more information about Andrea's disappearance. And in May 2013, Kathy received a message from a woman named Meta McLeod, who told her that she was abducted from the Windmill gas station in Hamilton, Michigan in September 1989. And since Andrea went missing in March 1989 from the same town, Meta thought maybe their cases were connected. Again, a small trigger warning, as Meta was just 6
Oh,
at the time that this happened. So Meta said that while walking to a friend's house, a man in a red truck stopped her and asked her if she wanted to see some puppies. But before Meta could respond, the man grabbed her, pulled her into the truck, and drove off. The man drove 18 miles to Silver Creek Campground, where he pulled over, grabbed a rope from the back of his truck, and walked Meta into the woods. He stripped her naked, tied her up, and sexually assaulted her. The man became spooked when some dogs started barking, so he left Meta tied up in the woods and fled the scene. Meta managed to untie herself and get to the nearest road where she flagged down someone who eventually called 911. Meta worked with a composite artist and they've released the photo of the suspect, but the suspect has never been found. At the time of Meta's assault, Dennis Bowman was working as a carpenter at the Makatawa Harbor, which is mere blocks from the gas station where Meta was abducted. And the Bowman house was about 6 blocks from the wooded area where the attack occurred. Dennis Bowman also drove a red truck, very similar to the vehicle that Meta had described. And if that wasn't enough, Dennis Bowman bears a striking resemblance to the man in that sketch. So at this point, Kathy was becoming suspicious about the Bowmans and wondering if they had been telling the truth about Andrea's disappearance. In 2015, Kathy and her husband Ed met with Carl Koppelman in Michigan to interview friends and family of Andrea's to try and get a clearer picture of Andrea's life. And let me just say, Ed's support of his wife throughout that documentary was beautiful.
I know. It really
Beautiful.
was.
Be more like Ed, people.
Yeah.
So they spoke to high school friends of Andrea's who said that Andrea often told them her parents hated her. One friend said one day after school, they went to Andrea's house, and the second they walked through the door, Dennis was chasing after Andrea and screaming at her for getting off the bus late, even though she absolutely didn't. Another friend said while having dinner with the Bowmans, Brenda and Dennis ate hamburgers, while Andrea and her friend were served sandwiches with nothing but mustard, ketchup, and relish. Andrea told her friend she was never allowed to eat, and Dennis reached across the table and struck Andrea so hard that she almost fell out of her chair. Brenda did nothing. At one point, Andrea hid at a friend's house for 4 days. She said Dennis would go into her room at night and make her do sexual things she didn't want to do. The friend encouraged Andrea to talk to the school principal about it, but when the principal brought in Brenda and Dennis, Andrea refused to say anything in front of them. Brenda later said at one point during an argument, Andrea told her that Dennis had molested her, and Brenda said that's a lie.
Ugh.
Yeah. Andrea was put into counseling and then brought in to speak to a priest. Andrea told the priest that she made up the allegations against Dennis. And while some may say that means Andrea made the whole thing up, I'm quicker to believe that Andrea realized in that moment no adult was going to help her and that telling the truth was only making her life more difficult. So she took back the allegations, maybe just to try and make her home life safer. Andrea's friends told Kathy that they suggested that Andrea run away, but Andrea refused, saying she couldn't, in good conscience, leave her baby sister in that house. When Andrea went missing, Brenda called her cousin Sue to tell her the news. Brenda said Andrea didn't take anything with her, not a purse or any money, which is interesting, since Dennis claimed that Andrea stole money from him. Sue felt things didn't add up, so she called in an anonymous tip to the police to say that they should take a closer look at Dennis regarding Andrea's disappearance. And if the police weren't going to take a closer look, well, Kathy Turkanian absolutely would. So Kathy used the Freedom of Information Act to get some background info on Dennis Bowman, and that's when Kathy discovered that in June 1998, Dennis was arrested for breaking and entering, as well as stalking a coworker. When Dennis was caught breaking into the home of his coworker Vicky, police noted that Dennis was carrying a duffel bag with a mask, burglar's tools, a sawed-off shotgun, and women's lingerie, which is assumed he stole from the scene. By the time he was caught, it was said that Dennis had broken into Vicky's home at least 20 times, cut the blinds in her bedroom, and stalked her for months. Dennis was sentenced to 1 year in county jail plus a few months probation. And going further back, in May 1980, Dennis had tried to assault an 18-year-old named Karen. While Karen was biking along Lakeshore Drive, Dennis drove up behind her, pointed a gun at her, and told her to head into the woods. Dennis then shot at the girl multiple times, but she managed to flag down a passing vehicle and flee the scene safely. Dennis was originally charged with attempted murder, but for whatever reason, it was lessened to assault with intent to commit criminal sexual conduct.
Okay.
The judge in the case mentioned that Dennis had told court psychologists that he had prior thoughts involving forcible rape, and that based on the psychologist's opinion, Dennis Bowman was the clinical picture of a rapist. The judge concluded, quote, Dennis is a danger to women if he is not confined. We conclude that a long-term separation is necessary and desirable. Dennis was sentenced to 5 to 10 years in prison. He attempted to get the sentence reduced, but was denied. While Dennis was in prison, Brenda and Andrea moved closer to the prison so they could visit him regularly. Or at least, Brenda made those decisions and Andrea was just forced to go along with it. And look, I get it. Brenda clearly took her marriage vows very seriously and refused to ever leave her husband. But when a court finds your husband is the clinical picture of a rapist, maybe it's time to stop letting him be around your daughter?
Yeah.
Dennis was released in January 1986 after serving about 5 years. Brenda's cousin Sue said she was shocked that Brenda chose to stay with Dennis, especially given that she had a young girl in the house. Brenda, of course, seemed to not only live in denial that there was anything wrong with Dennis, but just fully supported him, no questions asked. But Brenda wasn't the only one who believed in Dennis. Despite serving time for assault with intent to commit criminal sexual conduct, Dennis taught Sunday school at the local church from 1993 to 1999. But Kathy Turkanian wasn't buying what Dennis was selling. In fact, Kathy was starting to believe that Dennis had something to do with Andrea's disappearance, whether Brenda realized it or not. So years later, when Kathy attended a conference about missing persons in Michigan, she was shocked to find Brenda there. Kathy lost her cool and publicly snapped at Brenda, screaming at her to tell the people who Dennis was and what he had been accused of. Brenda said, quote, she acted like such a witch, screamed and hollered that because my husband was in prison one time, he was a monster. He killed her and I stood and watched. We're not that kind of people. To be clear, when I say Kathy lost her cool, she did. But let it be known, it was justified, and I am fully Team Kathy at this point. I was
Yes.
fully Team Kathy right out the gate. She's an absolute spitfire, and I have so much respect for her and the lengths she was willing to go to get justice for her daughter. And to Brenda, never going to hear this, probably for the best. To her, I say, your husband wasn't a monster for being in prison one time. First of all, it was more than once, but neither here nor there. Many non-monsters get put into prison all the time. Your husband, Brenda, was a monster because of why he was put in prison. He tried to rape an 18-year-old girl at gunpoint. When Brenda was forced to acknowledge Dennis's crimes, she said, quote, I haven't forgotten what he did, but I have forgiven him. I take my marriage vows seriously. Seeing Brenda staunchly defend Dennis was just fuel to Kathy's fire. Kathy started meeting with Carl Koppelman, who was by this point so fully invested in Andrea's case, and they would drive around Michigan to the various houses where Dennis Bowman had lived. They discovered that less than 6 months after Andrea's disappearance, the Bowmans moved to a new house, which to me, as a mother, seems like an odd choice. If you thought she ran away, why wouldn't you stay in the hopes that she would come back?
Of course.
So Kathy was immediately suspicious about that. And while looking at the Bowmans' newer property on Google Earth, Kathy noticed a weird area on the property about 20 to 30 feet from the house. Everything on the property seemed to change every year, But that one specific spot always kind of stood out to her. So Kathy became convinced Andrea was dead and that Dennis had buried her on their property. But even if police have a suspicion that someone committed a crime, they can't just go and dig up a person's property, not without a warrant. And at this point, there was no proof that Andrea was dead, let alone that Dennis was involved. Plus, it seemed like an outrageous idea. If Dennis had harmed Andrea, he would have likely buried her in a large wooded area across from the house they were living in at the time, not in the yard of the house they moved into 6 months later. Police spoke with Dennis and he said, quote, "We had nothing to do with Andrea's disappearance. I will swear it on a stack of Bibles." But Kathy believed in her heart that Dennis was responsible. So Kathy put up a billboard on the main road in Hamilton, just down the street from the Bowman's house, so Dennis could see it every single day. Kathy also put up missing posters throughout town, which Dennis said she only did to hassle them. And to that I say, Dennis, why didn't you and Brenda ever put up missing flyers for Andrea? Is it because you knew she wasn't really missing? You fucking dirtbag. That's where I'm at.
Yep. Yep.
That's
It's fair.
where I'm at. Kathy said that the billboard was strategically placed so that Dennis would have to face it every day. The flyers, however, were an attempt at gathering information from the public, not an attempt to hassle the Bowmans. Kathy instead chose to outright hassle them by repeatedly calling their house to the point where they had their phone disconnected. She just wanted them to know she was going to fight for her daughter the way any true parent would. And then, seemingly out of nowhere, on November 22nd, 2019, Dennis Bowman got arrested. During a video recording from inside the police vehicle, Dennis rambled to himself, quote, "6 cops come at me out of nowhere, slam me against the window, and said I'm under arrest. They won't tell me what for. I didn't kill my daughter. There's no goddamn way. 31 years ago, she walked out of our life. We have no idea where she is. I didn't murder my daughter." Now, I've never been arrested, knock wood. But isn't it super suspicious to get arrested and then immediately start saying you didn't kill your missing daughter? It's one thing to say, "I don't know why you're arresting me. I've done nothing wrong." It's another thing entirely to say, "My daughter, who police have only ever stated is missing, oh, I didn't kill her." I, they never mentioned your daughter. Why would you immediately go there unless maybe guilty conscience?
Mm-hmm.
It's just incredibly suspicious, since Andrea had nothing to do with the crime that Dennis was actually being arrested for. It turns out that thanks to advancements in technology and DNA testing, police were able to determine that Dennis was responsible for a murder that took place 39 years prior. In September 1980, Kathleen Doyle was living in Norfolk, Virginia. She had been married for less than a year, and her husband, who was a pilot in the Navy, was out on deployment. On the evening of September 9th, Kathleen had her friend Vivian over for some wine. Vivian left around 9:30. A couple days later, Vivian started to get concerned because she couldn't get a hold of Kathleen. So Vivian and her husband went over to Kathleen's house. They noticed the front door wasn't fully closed. The 2 wine glasses from nights earlier were still in the living room, which was strange. When they got to the bedroom, they found furniture had been overturned, Kathleen's belongings had been scattered. In a corner of the room under the mattress, they found Kathleen's body. She had been sexually assaulted, stabbed multiple times in the chest and back, and asphyxiated with an electrical cord. Kathleen Doyle was just 25 at the time of her death. She was described as charismatic, joyful, and had dreams of becoming a writer. During the autopsy, the medical examiner noted that Kathleen's body was covered in bruises and that she had a small round burn mark on her cheek about the size of like the end of a cigar. But it seemed the exact match to a wooden Lincoln log, which was found in the bathroom garbage can. The end of that Lincoln log was burnt. For those who are unaware. Lincoln logs are these like little wooden dowel type logs that work as like a children's construction toy kind of thing. They were first created in 1916, are still available today, but I think they were mostly popular in like the 50s.
Mm.
But since Kathleen and her husband didn't have children, why was there a single Lincoln log in the house? As far as I can tell, there were no other Lincoln logs found in the house. So the perp brought it with him? He was just carrying it around? Just feels like such an odd detail to me. When Vivian and her husband first found the body, they tried to call for help, but discovered that the mouthpiece on the telephone had been removed, meaning that the perp dismantled it. So if Kathleen tried to call for help, no one would be able to hear her. No strange fingerprints were found at the scene. So, since the murder occurred at a Navy base, police focused on men who weren't deployed at the time. But they made it through the full list and didn't find their suspect. After that, the case went cold until decades later when Kathleen's bedspread was tested. Investigators were able to get a DNA profile of the killer using genetic genealogy. They discovered 31 individuals who were genetically linked to the possible killer. The last name on that list was Dennis Bowman. The plan was to ask each person on that list for a DNA sample, but the lead detective on the case had a chance encounter with a member of the Michigan State Police who saw the list and immediately said, "Oh, Dennis Bowman's your guy." However, it was said that Dennis was in Michigan at the time of Kathleen's murder. Even Brenda claimed Dennis couldn't have done it. He wasn't in Virginia at the time. But detectives looked at the court transcripts from the case where, Dennis had attempted to assault an 18-year-old girl at gunpoint in May 1980. In the transcripts, Dennis's defense lawyer states that Dennis was not present at the time as he was attending a 2-week summer camp requirement with the Navy. Where was the summer camp? Norfolk, Virginia.
Oh my God.
When did the lawyer make that statement? September 16th. Kathleen's murder was September 9th. So Dennis absolutely was in Virginia at the time. So police now just needed a sample of Dennis's DNA, but he wasn't going to give it up willingly. But Dennis and his wife voluntarily went to the police to talk about Kathy Turkanian's harassing phone calls. During the interview, Dennis was offered a drink, and when he left the station, he left the cup behind. So the police had it tested, and wouldn't you know, Dennis Bowman's DNA came back as an exact match for Kathleen's killer. When Dennis was asked about Kathleen's murder, he said he was about 1.5 weeks into a 2-week reserve, and so he was wound up really tight and needed to get off the ship. So he went to a bar and got absolutely wasted, and on the way back, noticed a house with no car in the driveway, and he thought maybe there'd be some money just, lying around inside. So he claims he used a pocket knife to pry open a window and then just wandered the house looking for money. Dennis claims he opened a door at the end of the hall and a woman sat up and screamed at him. He said he still had the pocket knife in his hand, and the woman grabbed his hand and accidentally stabbed herself with the knife.
Oh my
He said
God.
it wasn't his fault. He panicked and left the scene. We, of course, know that he's lying, as Kathleen was found with her hands tied behind her back. Not to mention, she had been raped, beaten, strangled, and stabbed repeatedly. Also, if Dennis was so drunk, then how did he have the foresight to remove the mouthpiece from the phone to make it unusable? To cut your victim off from any source of help is a cold, calculated move, not some drunken hunt for money.
Yeah.
Not to mention, Mr. Well, she stabbed herself and I left. Really? Then how'd they find your fucking semen on the bedspread, asshole? You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like, just I can't. When told the facts, Dennis just kept repeating, I didn't do that. But then there was that chilling moment where he just went, I didn't do that. I didn't do that. Ah, I've done it again. Mm.
Ugh,
For Lauren's psychologist hat,
please.
Dennis also added, quote, not one time in my life have I ever heard my mother say I love you. And the last thing my dad told me, your mom's got a heart of gold, hard and cold. The idea that he's trying to blame his mother's lack of affection for him raping women and children is wild. All you're doing is proving why you're so angry at women to begin with. Also, I think it shows a lot when it's his mother and his dad, calling them instead of like mom and dad or mother and father, specifically
Mm.
mother and dad feels like it's something. But he also mentioned that there was a demon inside him and said that it's trying to get out, but he won't let it. Um, I don't know if he truly believes that or if he was attempting to maybe try for an insanity plea. Could go either way. Police used Dennis's arrest to get a warrant to officially check his property, as Kathy Turkanian had been begging them for years. They brought in cadaver dogs and ground penetrating radar, but they found nothing. In June 2020, regarding the case of Kathleen Doyle, Dennis pleaded guilty to one count of first-degree murder, one count of rape, and one count of burglary. He was sentenced to 2 life sentences plus 20 years for the burglary. And since the crime occurred in Virginia, that means Dennis would be extradited there to serve his time. So at this point,
Sorry.
police knew the only way they were going to get closure on Andrea's case was if Dennis confessed. And since Dennis wanted to stay in Michigan to be closer to his wife and daughter, who at this point were both absolutely supportive of Dennis, the police suggested if Dennis were to tell the truth about Andrea, maybe they could try and have Dennis remain in Michigan. Otherwise, he's getting transferred to a prison in Virginia and he'll probably never see his wife again. Dennis then asked to speak to Brenda alone. He told her, quote, I've done some stuff that I'm really ashamed of. Andrea's dead. She's been dead from the start. Dennis claims that on the day that Andrea allegedly disappeared, he caught Andrea in their bedroom stealing money. He said they got into an argument and Andrea told him she was leaving. He said that he hit her and she fell backwards down the stairs. When Dennis checked on Andrea, he said that her neck was clearly broken and that she didn't have a pulse. He said he was scared that he'd lose Brenda and Vanessa, so he wrapped Andrea's body in a blanket and hid her in the barn before calling the police to report her missing. Dennis had said that around 12 or 13, Andrea went from being a good kid to shoplifting, buying drugs, and running away from home. Is any of that true? Or was Dennis just looking for a way to tarnish Andrea's reputation so the police wouldn't bother looking for her? Because it absolutely worked. They claimed her behavior was that of a runaway, and they just let the case go cold. Also, I couldn't, the amount of times they were like, oh, well, she was buying so many drugs. Not a single person said she ever used drugs. But it was like, well, she was buying them. And I'm like, was she?
Yeah, was she? Exactly.
Stop it. And 2 weeks after after she was reported missing, police put out a warrant for Andrea's arrest because Dennis had claimed Andrea stole money for him. So I have to believe that the police just didn't think she was worth searching for at this point. And Dennis said he hid the body in the barn. A 14-year-old girl goes missing, and the police didn't even bother to search the property? Did they look anywhere? Because Dennis said Andrea's body remained in the barn for a couple of days before he tried to place her in a cardboard barrel. However, by then, the body wouldn't fit, so he chose to cut Andrea's legs off with a machete. His own daughter. Dennis added that the machete didn't work well, so partway through, he switched to an axe to, quote, finish the job.
Oh,
Again, his own daughter. Dennis then claimed that once Andrea's body was in the barrel, he rolled it out and placed it next to his neighbor's garbage bins, and the following day, the barrel was gone. He said that he burned Andrea's bag and coat before he called the police. He said, quote, it was probably still burning in the barrel outside when they got there, which is kind of the psychopath's way of saying the evidence was right there under their noses, but I outsmarted them.
yeah.
Dennis said that he never found the money that Andrea allegedly took, but he assumes it was in the bag, which he burned, because he didn't bother to check the bag first. So clearly, he wasn't overly concerned about the money. Or the more likely scenario is that Andrea hadn't taken any money in the first place. But on March 23rd, just 12 days after Andrea went missing, police issued a warrant for her arrest, claiming she'd stolen money from Dennis. To see Andrea listed as a suspect on the same piece of paper that lists Dennis as a victim enrages me. I may not know his whole backstory, but I can confidently say that Dennis is not a victim.
Nope.
You claim that your daughter died in an accident, and instead of calling an ambulance or simply telling the police it was an accident, you chose to hide the body and cut it up before placing it in the trash. If it was genuinely an accident, the police would be able to see that. The only reason you hide a body in that intense of a way is if you have something to hide. When police asked Dennis how he felt when he heard people claim they saw Andrea after her death, he said, good, it took the heat off me. This man is about as enraging to me as Patrice's husband in the very first episode of this show that
Yeah.
we ever did.
Yeah.
When the police questioned Dennis's course of action following Andrea's death, Dennis said, quote, just because she broke her neck doesn't mean I didn't love her.
Oh my
And
God.
to that I say, just because you claim you loved her doesn't mean you actually showed it in any way. But also notice how he put the blame for Andrea's death
Yep.
on Andrea by saying she broke her neck as though he was just an innocent bystander and had nothing to do with it. Dennis told his wife, quote, as long as I didn't tell you, you had hope. But making her worry about her daughter for decades is okay? I mean, that's assuming that Brenda even cared to begin with. She may claim she did, but to allow your husband to physically abuse your child in front of you and do nothing is horrific. To not feed your child proper meals despite you yourself eating proper meals is horrific. To hear your child say, he molested me, and you instantly call her a liar, even though you know it exactly lines up with Dennis's past behaviors, horrific. Andrea deserved a mother that would be willing to fight for her safety and well being, and it doesn't seem that Brenda did either. But you know who did? Kathy Turkanian. So to me, Kathy was the mother that Andrea deserved. Every child deserves someone who is willing to be in their corner. After hearing Dennis's confession, Brenda said, the only thing that matters is our love for each other.
Oh,
Fuck, she plays the doting wife well, doesn't she?
it's so gross.
100%. When Brenda told her cousin Sue about the confession, Sue got upset. You know, because it's horrific. Brenda said that Sue acted like he chopped her up when she was alive. And I know I don't have time to keep coming back to me as a mother, but as a mother, if I was in Brenda's shoes and I found out that my husband cut up the body of our child, I'm never going to forgive him uh, ever. I'm also never just going to refer to it as he chopped her up, like in such passing, like it's nothing. Um, and this is all before you even add in the fact that he lied for decades. Let her believe the child was out there somewhere. But that confession would be enough to make me never see that man again. I mean, if I was in her shoes, I mean, I likely, I likely would have bounced in 1980 when he went to prison for attempting to rape a teenager at gunpoint.
Yeah.
No, but to each their own. So Dennis claims that Andrea is dead and that he literally threw her out with the trash. But Kathy Turkanian is not buying it because despite police finding nothing during their initial search, Kathy still believed that Andrea's body was buried somewhere on Bowman's property. On the Bowman's property. There we go. So detectives continued to push Dennis to reveal the truth, but he drags his feet and refuses to give in. And they know the only person Dennis will ever fully confess to is Brenda, because she seems to be the only person whose opinion Dennis cares about. And even then, he doesn't care enough about her to not commit crimes. But that's neither here nor there. So police monitor the letters and phone calls between Dennis and Brenda when they see a letter that Dennis wrote on December 12th, 2019, about 20 days after his arrest. In the letter, Dennis told Brenda, quote, "Between you and me, just us. Andrea did fall. She did break her neck, and I did hide her body. But I did not throw her body in the trash. I placed her body in a proper grave next to a graveyard." In a second letter dated 16 days later, Dennis wrote, quote, "I wrapped her in a clean white sheet, neat and tight like a mummy. I also wrapped her hands and feet with a red ribbon. She liked that color. Then I placed her in a new 6 foot by 8 foot silver tarp, sprinkled cedar chips, cloves, and pieces of cinnamon between her and the tarp, and then filled the grave." Dennis added that since her burial, he had walked past her grave more than 100 times. Police searched the perimeters of nearby graveyards with ground penetrating radar and cadaver dogs, but found nothing. They did, however, find the machete that Dennis first used to dismember the body. It was under Dennis's bed.
Oh my God, I forgot about that.
Yeah. So, was that the usual place he kept it, or did he just like it close by? When police told Dennis that they knew he was lying, they asked again about the location of Andrea's remains. Dennis said, quote, "I'm the one person that's going to keep that for the rest of my life." But again, police knew their only way to really get through to Dennis was through Brenda. So they convinced Brenda that Dennis owed her the truth so that she would really push him. Brenda told him if he just told the truth, he could stay in Michigan and they could continue to have visits. Otherwise, he'd go to Virginia and they'd never see each other again. So Brenda kept pushing for the truth. She said she wanted her baby girl home. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And finally, on February 4th, 2020, Dennis told Brenda that Andrea was, quote, "so near, so far, right under your nose." What a cryptic piece of shit. Anyhow, Dennis then elaborated and said Andrea was buried in their backyard. Brenda said that was impossible because they didn't live at their current house at the time of Andrea's death. But Dennis admitted after putting Andrea in the barrel, he buried it in their yard. And once they signed the papers for the new house, he dug the barrel up and reburied her at the new house. Just a very quick, what are the odds? Side note, Dennis was arrested November 22nd, and he finally confessed to the whereabouts of Andrea's remains on February 4th. And while those dates might mean nothing to most people, unless they're massive fans of Jamie Lee Curtis and Alice Cooper, respectively, but those dates happen to be the birthdays of these two chuckleheads. And I thought, what are the odds that two of the biggest dates in this case have such a major significance to us?
I just
I
wrote
mean,
that down. So, yes.
I assumed you'd point it out because I
Yeah.
just glossed over the dates, but I mean, come on.
Yeah, that's really
Yeah.
weird.
So investigators excavated the scene, and after hours of digging, the backhoe uncovered the metal ring from the barrel. Investigators then dug the rest by hand, and sure enough, they found 4 bags within the barrel which contained the remains of Andrea Bowman. In the bags, in with the bags was a bag full of dirty diapers, which was either done to mask the smell of the body or it was Dennis's sick way of saying he thought Andrea was garbage. Honestly, could be either. But also, since the body was placed in multiple trash bags, that means he didn't just cut off her legs. He fully dismembered that child, a 14-year-old girl.
Ugh.
Horrifying. Um, I can't even begin to think of who would do that to a child, let alone one that they supposedly loved. The medical examiner said it was impossible to determine a cause of death. So, just as Kathy Turkanian had been saying for years, Dennis Bowman had buried Andrea on his property. According to Psychology Today, some killers bury their victims nearby simply because they have no other plan, or sometimes it's to remind them of the joy and excitement they get from killing. And then sometimes it's just so they can continue to have more control over the victim. And since Dennis literally dug up Andrea's remains and reburied them at his new house, I'm quicker to believe it was all about control. But, you know,
Well, I also wouldn't rule out perversion,
oh, sure,
wanting to have his like trophy.
of course. I'm also like, how did Brenda never notice if it took a backhoe hours of digging down to find this body? Like, how did he bury and dig up and rebury a body without her ever knowing? Like, that to me is, I don't get it, but I
Well,
don't know.
it's an interesting question, right? Because we're believing her. We're believing her. We're believing that she didn't know anything about this.
Right.
There's a world in which she was involved.
True.
Speculation,
Of course. I mean,
but
there's also a world in which she knew, but she blocked it out because she's like, he's my husband.
yeah.
This is where I'm at.
Yeah, I
Uh,
don't give them any credibility, either of them. Like
no,
I don't trust
no,
either of them personally.
no,
No.
100%. When Brenda asked Dennis why he lied about the burial, he said he simply hoped that she'd let it go if she believed Andrea had a proper burial. He then started getting angry at her, as though it was too much to ask for the whereabouts of your deceased child. And even though Dennis was clearly in the wrong here, he started getting angry. And Brenda quickly said, well, I don't want you mad, which I'm no expert, but I took as a sign that maybe Dennis was emotionally abusive towards Brenda. But in the end, Brenda said, well, nothing changed. She still loves Dennis. Mm. But it still doesn't excuse her actions. Her child went missing and she never put up a single missing poster. The first posters to be printed and posted about Andrea were done so by Kathy decades later. After Andrea's remains were found, police told Brenda that Dennis also confessed to sexually assaulting a woman in San Diego before they were married. He then sexually assaulted two more women in San Diego in the early 80s, as well as a woman who lived just blocks away from them in Michigan in October 1979. With that victim, Dennis said that he, quote, did bad things to her. Don't love it.
Ugh.
When asked about Meta's case from September 1989, Dennis claims that he's innocent, but he also swore on a stack of Bibles he knew nothing about what happened to Andrea.
Yeah.
After hearing his voice on tape, Meta is convinced that the man who assaulted her was Dennis. However, there is still no evidence, although I absolutely trust Meta's judgment on that one. There is one source, I can't tell for sure, but one source claims the rope in Meta's case was tested and came back as not a match to Dennis. I don't know how accurate that is, but based on the vehicle, the appearance, and his history, I still really believe that he was the culprit.
Well, I mean, he tried to lure that
Allegedly.
18-year-old into the woods at
Right?
gunpoint. He was like, get
It's
into
his
the woods.
MO.
It's the same MO. He just chose a
Yep.
younger victim with
Yep.
Meta, who was probably easier, well, was easier to bully.
100%.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Meta has since created her own website with an incredibly detailed timeline of Dennis Bowman's life, including the crimes we know about, as well as some potential crimes that seem similar to his MO. But the truth is, the full extent of Dennis Bowman's crimes will never be known. If it
Well,
took this much pulling and prodding to get him to admit to Andrea's death, I just don't see Dennis ever openly admitting to another crime. He's going to be in jail for the rest of his life. There is no incentive for him to tell the truth, especially when he still claims that Andrea's death was an accident, and I certainly don't believe that it was.
no.
With his history of violence against women, I don't believe for 1 second that he didn't purposely kill that child. In Andrea's case, Dennis pleaded no contest to one count of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to 35 to 50 years in prison, and despite his hopes of staying in Michigan, he was immediately transferred to a prison in Virginia to complete his life sentences for the Kathleen Doyle case. Brenda had Andrea's remains cremated, and she had someone give half of the remains to Kathy Turkanian, which at first almost kind of seemed like a nice gesture. But then Kathy pointed out all it just did was chop her up even more. And then when you kind of see it from that angle, it's hard to see it any other way. When Brenda told Dennis about it, he said, "Well, remember, she threw her away." And let me just say, Kathy was 16 years old. She lived with an abusive mother who pressured her into giving her child up for adoption. And while I am no expert in the case of adoption, I think that most mothers choose the option in the hopes that their child will have a chance at a better life than what they could provide. I think it's an incredibly brave and heartbreaking decision. And I guarantee that most of those parents continue to think about that child for the rest of their lives. To suggest that giving your child up for adoption is throwing them away is offensive. And since he literally threw his child away, I hope that Dennis absolutely rots.
Hmm.
But for me, the most beautiful part of it all is that Dennis Bowman never would have been charged with Andrea's murder if it wasn't for Kathy Turkanian. She started the entire ball rolling on the case and is responsible for ensuring that her daughter's remains were found. And while she doesn't need to hear this from me, although I don't know if she ever heard it as a child, but I am so incredibly proud of Kathy for her tenacity. She never gave up. She gave Andrea a voice after Dennis silenced her. But so many other adults failed Andrea. The principal and the counselors who didn't look into the abuse allegations, the police who dismissed her missing persons case and just called her a runaway, the grandmother who pushed Kathy into adoption, and especially the Bowmans. Brenda allowed Andrea to remain in a situation that was not safe. She didn't feed her properly, despite the adults eating properly. She let not one but two young girls share a home with a man the courts described as a clinical picture of a rapist. So, yeah, I'm angry. I'm angry at Brenda for allowing two young girls to grow up in a home with that man. I'm angry at her for not putting in any effort to find Andrea when she first went missing. I'm also angry at Dennis for spending decades free after committing horrific crimes. I'm angry he used that free time to assault and victimize countless other girls and women. I'm angry that he likely got away with so many crimes we'll never know about. I'm angry that he doesn't seem to have any remorse for anything he's done. And I'm angry that putting him in jail for the rest of his life, a sad, probably few decades, just isn't going to be enough justice for the pain that he's caused. So, yeah, she angry. But she also reporting for True Crime and Cocktails. This is a terrible segue. I'm Christy Oxborrow.
Listen, I I liked it.
Of
Look, we
course.
got lots to talk about. Let's take a quick break, hit the can, grab another drink, and we'll be back to discuss the that's not it. I've got too many papers. Into the Fire, the Lost Daughter episode of True Crime and Cocktails. All right. Clap two on three. One, two, three. Welcome back to this episode of True Crime and Cocktails. We're, of course, discussing Into the Fire, The Lost Daughter. I want to make sure I get that correct. Again, like I said before, I thought this was like such a well done documentary. I mean, shout out to Charlize
Yeah,
Theron. Stop it, Ash.
love
But
it.
anyway, it was such a well done documentary. It's a horrible story, but I think again, it's an important story. And I think the thing that's so remarkable, like you were saying, is that it really, in some ways, is so fascinating because it feels like it's Kathy's story, and that it was like, you know, in the end, out of a complete horror show, it's like at least she was able to like get answers and get justice and peace for the daughter that she did give up, which I'm sure, like you
Yes.
said, like we don't even need to get into the depths of how difficult those decisions are. And of course, mothers are making those decisions to try and provide their child with a better life. So I think already she was in a nightmare just upon the idea that, oh my God, I gave this child up and then she didn't have an amazing life. And then
Yeah,
the addition that it was like, not only that, but she was murdered by one of her parents. I mean, I'm sure that Kathy must feel like so extra motivated to like, I have to get justice. I cannot let this be the case for this child that I wanted nothing but the best for? Um, and I do also think it's incredible that like her mother's intuition, like she knew where her body was. She knew where her daughter was. She was like, she said it from the
100%.
beginning, and you see it in the documentary. She's like, I know
Yeah.
that she's there. I know it. And she was right. And even though
Yeah.
they looked and they didn't find her, it was like, no, she was right all along, which I think is also like
Yeah.
one of those like you can't argue with the intuition that obviously she was feeling. Um,
100%.
but yeah, listen, I won't belabor this too much, but I got to go on a bit of a rant about both Dennis and Brenda Bowman. So
I
buckle in.
can't wait.
Um, I think, I'm going to say something that's really bold.
Oh,
I think that obviously the number one villain in this story is, of course, Dennis Bowman. Without question, this
oh,
man is
sure.
depraved. He's a fucking repeated serial rapist, killer, all of these things.
Yep.
Without question, he is the biggest villain. But I give the second place to Brenda because
100%.
because to me, she does not fit the typical MO of someone who has been undergoing long-term abuse. Go with me for a second. And I'm not an
Okay.
expert. I'm talking out my ass. Don't come for me. I think it's more than possible. I think it's plausible that he was probably emotionally and mentally abusive to her, of course. And I'm sure that that leads to her being the way she is. The only other thing I would offer is that there are lots and lots of women who are unfortunately in those similar situations who,
Sure.
when the husband is forcibly removed, i.e., put into a prison, that's when those women run. That's when those women are like, I got to get out of here. I got to save my kids. I got to do whatever.
Yep.
The fact that Brenda stood by her man after detail upon detail of like another rape, another
Hmm.
assault, another a murder, the murder of your daughter. I'm like, I'm sorry, but I think there's something else going on there.
Yeah.
I don't think this is just his abuse because we see lots of stories, and I'm not suggesting that it's at all easy for women and mothers to extricate themselves and their children out of abusive homes. I'm not suggesting that. It's very difficult, it's very nuanced. We have nothing but compassion, obviously, for anyone who's in that scenario. This isn't that. This is a woman who spent years with this man behind bars, finding
Yep.
out again and again and again all of the disgusting, horrific crimes he's committed, and she
Hmm.
chooses to stand by him.
Yeah.
There's something else going on up there. Now, again, this could be because of her own upbringing. This could be because of her own trauma, whatever. But I'm like, I don't think it's only the way he treated her. I think that there is something else going on in her brain that's not right.
Sure.
I'm sorry. I just think I think it's rare for people to be able to forgive. I'd say one rape. I'd say
Sure.
one murder. I'd say that would be difficult for someone to forgive their partner. But when she's forgiven him for multiple rapes, multiple murders, this isn't one of those scenarios where he was in prison and she wrote him a letter and they got married after the fact, where
Yep.
those women justify those marriages and the pasts of those men in whatever ways they choose to. This is a different situation. And the fact that after everything and finding out the details of how he treated their daughter's body and her going, well, all that matters is our love. That's
Oh,
that again. I'm like, this woman is culpable. That's sick.
100%.
If you're standing by your man that hard, what were you witnessing in that house? What were you turning a blind eye to? Do you really
Oh,
know that he had nothing to do? Did you really know that she wasn't dead? I mean, I'm making bold claims here, but these are all speculations,
sure.
obviously. But you know what I'm saying? Why
Oh,
are we trusting her?
yes. I mean, the second that your child is like, "Well, he's molesting me,"
Oh,
you don't immediately snap, "You're a liar," unless you're angry because you don't want her talking about stuff that you know about.
or
And
stuff that,
you don't want her pointing out how horrific your husband is
right.
when you think he's the greatest thing ever.
Well, and also let's keep in mind here Andrea goes missing March 1989.
Yep.
At this point, sorry, I'm just flipping through my notes here. At this point, we know that in 1980, he
Yep.
was charged with the crime about the 18-year-old trying to get her to go into the woods at gunpoint.
Yep.
He's done 5 years for that.
Yep.
The court, as you've pointed out, the court said this man is the picture of a rapist. This man is like going to commit this crime again, essentially.
Yeah. They admitted he told them he had thoughts about forcible rape.
Right. And Brenda would know this. So the fact, to me, I'm not giving any grace, by the way, that it's like, oh, it was the first mention that he had done anything sexually wrong. She's going, oh, that's not true. You're lying. I'm not defending, if I'm not saying that that would be okay. If she was
Sure.
like telling her that she was telling Andrea that she was a liar. But my point just is that it's like, but you knew that he took that girl into the woods at gunpoint to rape her. You knew that he had thought, it came out in court that he had thoughts of
Yep.
forcible rape. So if after that, 9 years later, your daughter comes to you and says, Dad's raping me, the fact that she called her a liar, knowing he has that past, knowing
Yep.
that he did prison time, that's sick. She is as sick
Yep.
as he is. I'm sorry. It's sick in a different way, but it's like, to me, to your point, everybody failed Andrea, which I think is like truly beyond tragic and hard to even think about because it feels like it was so preventable. Um, but she was the first line of defense.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. This isn't a girl making up a story. I believe her.
Correct.
I believe Andrea completely. Why wouldn't he be
Yep.
abusing her when she's in the home and available and he's going out of the home trying to do it? And then we find out later has committed multiple assaults.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, again, it's the fact that Brenda knew there was a history of this and still chose
Yep.
to tell her that gaslight her and say, no, you're a liar. That's the shit that I'm like,
Oh, yep.
you're a villain too, man. Sorry. It's disgusting.
Yeah.
Um, disgusting. The fact that they had to move closer to the prison while he was in there,
Yep.
gross. Um, gross. The fact that he was allowed to teach Sunday school after he had done all that prison time
Yep.
for a sex crime against a child, against a
Yep.
teenager.
Yep.
I'm like, do they not do background checks? Do churches not do background checks for Sunday school teachers? I guess not. I guess not. Um, yeah, the fact that they never put up missing posters, the fact that they didn't really miss her. Like again, like I'm sorry. Like I have a Brenda, I have a really hard time with. Like again, because to me it's like
Yeah.
Dennis is a demon. He's sick, he's disgusting,
Yeah.
he's depraved, he's all of these things. And that doesn't justify anything to me, but I'm like, oh, you're just a fucking monster. Brenda, I'm like, it burns me. Like it's like there's always monsters among us. You failed your daughter.
100%.
It's disgusting. Um,
She had so many chances. She could have gotten that child out of that situation.
100%. And
So
again,
many. And
there
I
was
get that it was a different time as far as like uh, leaving your husband and all of those sorts of things, raising a child on your own when I don't think she had like any work experience, all of these things. But she had supportive family members. Her
Right.
cousin
Great
adored
point.
Andrea. She absolutely would have taken them into her home to get away
Absolutely.
from that guy. 100% she would have.
That's a really great point. You're right. She did have resources available to her. She did have
She
people
did.
around her that would have been willing to help her. That's
Yep.
also that's again, that's another point where it's like, what was she doing? Um, Now here's something I want to point out. May 1980, he's
Hmm.
arrested for the 18-year-old lure forcibly at gunpoint.
Yep.
In September 1980, he was already in the system. There was court dates happening. He missed the court date in September because he needed to be
Correct.
in Virginia doing this Navy training, whatever.
Right.
I just want to point out that this man was being charged with a potential sex crime.
Correct.
They allowed him to travel. If they had simply said to him, no, you're not allowed to leave the state, you're currently in the system and being tried for a sex crime against a teenager, Kathleen Doyle would be alive.
100%.
There's no reason why he should have been allowed to leave. No
No.
reason. You hear about it all the time. People get arrested. I mean, we see this on Law and Order Weekly, where it's like you're not allowed to leave the state. You're not. You have to be checking in about your whereabouts because again, it's like it's just another way. Again, the system and people have failed women. They failed Kathleen Doyle, and and
Yep.
and to me, it's just so sad that again, it would have been very easy to say, no, you're not allowed to leave the state until this court case is wrapped up. Because by the way,
Yes.
when the court case got wrapped up, I want to remind everyone he was sentenced to prison time. So he was, you know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? Like, ugh. Now,
Yeah.
I also have to comment psychologist hat on. Not one
Oh,
time have I
sure.
ever heard my mother say, I love you. I'm of two minds of this. One, I think that it's possible that that's true.
Sure.
Another part of me thinks that's not true at all. Because the bottom line is, it doesn't matter whether it was true or false. He's only using it as a manipulation.
Sure. Oh,
So,
and then you feel bad for him.
right, he's trying to find a justification for his actions. So he's
Right.
whether it's true or false. And by the way, this man changed his story. He's a liar, he's a rapist, he's a murderer. Like I don't trust him. I don't trust anything. I
No.
like again, the fact that he changed his story about Andrea's death and burial so many times. I'm like, again, to
Yeah.
me, this guy's like a complete psychopath. Um, I think he talks about a demon inside of him. Great. I just don't even buy it. It's possible he had completely loving parents. We don't know.
Very
Right. And
true.
to me, it's just the fact that he even said that is like, well, my mother never told me I love that she loved me. Obviously, like he's
Oh,
smart, right? He's not a dumb guy. He knows that then people are going to say, "Oh, well, that must be why he had this thing and whatever, like
yeah.
this thing against women." And it's like, or maybe he just made that up.
Yeah. Because they're
This is
also going to go, oh, well, it's his mother's fault.
right.
And suddenly now nothing's Dennis's fault.
Well, yeah, exactly, which is a real pattern with him also. The fact that they put out a warrant for Andrea's arrest because she allegedly stole money is the sickest thing I feel like I've ever heard. The
Mm-hmm.
fact that he kept the machete under the bed, the fact that he then turned to an axe. I mean, again, this is the fact that Brenda is like, oh, well, I'm like, do you hear the words that are being said? How are you okay? How are you willing to forgive this man for this? Again, I'm like, she's sick.
Right?
There's something wrong with her because this is not like you forgive your spouse for like cheating on you or whatever, crashing
Sure.
your car. Like this is like he murdered and dismembered violently your child.
Correct.
That's I'm
Yeah.
not even bringing in the other murder, the other rapes. I'm not even bringing any of
Sure.
that into it. It's like you're okay with this? There's something wrong with her. Like this is
Oh,
not
it's
typical.
it's not. No, it's not.
No, it's sick. It's sick. Um, the fact that he created this reality or this story, I should say rather, this story for Brenda about like I wrapped her in a white sheet, I
Oh my
tied her
God.
hands with red ribbon, I sprinkled cinnamon and cloves and whatnot into whatever. And then you find out No, he actually hacked her into pieces that he put into 4 bags and then buried her under a bag full of dirty diapers. That
Yeah.
to me, right there, speaks to how truly sick and depraved that man is. The fact that he could create a story that he thinks would make it more palatable for his wife, knowing the truth, knowing how he
Mhm.
defiled that body, how he treated it. I mean, to me, look, we know a lot about serial killers. We talk about a lot of murders on this show. Obviously, it's part of the theme. The details to me of what he did to Andrea's body, I think are some of the worst I've ever heard. And for me, it's because it's the disconnect between the reality of what he did and then these stories that he's telling. That to me is so sickening and so chilling.
Yeah.
It again, I understand why this people wanted to tell this story because it's shocking. Now,
Yeah.
the final thing I wanted to say is here's my thoughts. Here's what I think happened.
Sure.
I don't think he caught her stealing money. Now,
No.
and trigger warning because what I'm about to say is going to be very unpleasant. I think his wife was at work. He knew that she was going to be at work for a certain amount of time, and we know it was a certain amount of time because in reality, we know it was enough time for Andrea to die and him to hide her body. That's
Yeah.
not going to take 5 minutes. That's going to be a process,
Yeah.
right?
I think she said she was home at like 10:30 or 11:30 or something. So, I mean, we're talking at least probably like a 4-hour shift.
Right.
So he drops
So
her off at like 6, gets home at 6:30, has another 3 to 4 hours.
right. So he's got time. He's got time here.
Yeah.
I think he was absolutely sneaking into her bedroom at night and molesting her. I
Yeah.
think he was like, I got a period of time here. I'm gonna, by the way, it's he comes in the house, puts the baby on the couch, and goes upstairs. I'm also like, that's so dangerous for that
It's
baby.
an interesting choice to say that immediately,
Why wouldn't
for
you?
that to be your move.
Right. And if you were really truly just looking to see where your other daughter was, why wouldn't you just carry the baby up there with you? Like, why are you putting the baby down to then go
Or,
look for your daughter?
yeah,
But
or
in
just
my,
call up the stairs.
right, but that's not what he wanted. I'm speculating that
Of
I think
course.
what happened was he went to make to molest her. I think that he was like, I've got a period of time where my wife's not going to be home. I'm
Sure.
going to go molest my daughter. I think she likely fought back because it's not the same sneaking in at night. You're so vulnerable, right? Like, and
Sure.
who knows, right? But I'm saying if she's not like in bed asleep, this is all of a sudden happening, but she's got wherewithal, she's awake, she's standing up. I could see her instinct possibly for the first time. I don't know, again, we're speculating here, but to fight him, to say no, I'm not doing
Sure.
this. I think it escalated. Do I think it's possible that she fell down the stairs and broke her neck and that's how she died? Sure, that's possible. I think he also has an MO of choking women. I think he also has an MO of guns. I think that
Yep.
he had the machete under his bed after the fact. Who's to say that he didn't beforehand? It's
Yep.
possible that now, granted, I was about to say I'm wrong, but then I'm also right. He had more than enough time. He
Yeah.
could have
We don't know when
absolutely
he called the police.
right. And we also
So,
know that there's a chunk of time that he could have cleaned up whatever crime scene was committed. And by the way,
yep.
he has a wife who's not asking any questions or calling the police about him. So if
Yep.
she came home and there was blood on the floor, right? She
Oh,
could have cleaned it up for
100%.
him. We don't know. So again, I don't, and the fact that the sad thing is that we'll never know the cause of death because of what he did to the body. But to me, I think it's that simple. I don't think she was stealing
Yep.
money. I don't think she
Nope.
was threatening to run away. I think he went home with, I think he went up there with the express desire to fucking be disgusting. She fought back, and then he either did push her down the stairs, and that's how she died, or again, he could have choked her. He could have stabbed her. He could have, who knows what he did with that machete?
Yeah.
We know that her body was in 4 bags in the end. And we also know that
Yeah.
he's not a reliable narrator. So to me, it's like the distance between that and the crime could have been much shorter than he's making it seem, right?
Sure.
Um,
Sure.
all I'm saying is I think it was that simple. I don't think that there was, and then this will be the last thing I say. If we're to believe that he put her in the barn and then he put her in a barrel and then he buried her and then he moved her again, here's the other thing. we can't buy any of it. We can't believe
Sure.
him, right? The only things that we know are true are the facts. We know that her body ended up in the barrel in the way that it did. That's all we know. In terms
Yeah.
of what he was doing and why he was moving it, I don't even know that we can believe the chronology. Because to your point again, it's like, how did how did she not notice? How did Brenda not notice that there was a
Yeah.
massive dig happening in her own backyard? Was it happening while she
Right?
was at work? How quickly was this man able to dig this hole and bury this barrel and fill it in again?
Yeah, like are we talking like he dug it himself, like with just like a shovel? Did he have some sort of like large equipment he used? Like I have a lot of questions.
Because it, but also let's just keep in mind, this is a woman who's forgiven this man for murder, for the
Yep.
murder of their own daughter and the brutal dismemberment of the body. Did she see there was digging happening in the backyard? I, I don't think she would have. Again, we know she wouldn't have called the police. I just don't believe her.
Mhm.
I think that that's the bottom line is that I don't trust her at all. And I,
No,
you know, I'm completely speculating, but all I'm saying is like there's a world in which she knew all of this the whole time.
sure,
There is that world. There's also the world that the truth is that she didn't and this was all a blind side, etc. It just is so difficult for me to accept. Because also when we hear about like serial killers, the couples that kill together, quite
sure,
often it's the woman who is going along with the man, right? This is not a when we see those cases, that's quite often the way it seems. So I can understand when two people find each other. And even if one of them is more into murder than the other, then they get into it together and then they're sick together,
sure,
right? Great. I think what's interesting about this that doesn't make any sense is that it would actually make more sense if Brenda was in on it. That would make more sense because we've seen that MO many, many times. It
sure,
happens, we hear those stories in those cases. But the idea that she absolutely had no idea what was going on ever, yet she was also indulging in like abusive behavior in the like withholding of the food and witness, right?
yeah,
Like it's interesting to me that then it's like, but she had absolutely no idea that any of this was going on and never knew and all of the above, but then is also willing to forgive all of it. Something just is odd to me. It just doesn't add up.
oh yeah. Look, I mean, again, I wouldn't have lasted beyond the first charge.
Oh,
But even if I'd somehow gotten there, the second you reach across a table and smack my kids so hard they almost fall off a chair, no. Like there's no chance that I'm not taking that child out of that home.
and even if I completely agree with you, but the only thing I will also say is, even if she was living in so much fear that she didn't feel like she could run away,
Sure.
right? There was, this is also the only time that we're hearing about this. Like, do we believe that that's the first time that that happened? I'm going to say
No.
probably not. He did it in front of a friend of the kid. He did it in front of
Yeah.
Andrea's friend, right? Or the
So
cousin.
he was a friend. Yeah. So he was
So he was
comfortable enough.
right. He's brazen enough that he's willing to hit his child in front of someone that doesn't belong in the family. So to me, this has been going on for some amount of time. And if that's
Yeah.
true, again, the place where this falls apart is that even if she was too scared to leave, she was afraid he was going to find them and kill them or whatever, there was a prison sentence. There was time for her to get away.
Yeah.
That's again where this just is so bizarre to me is that it's like how brainwashed were you? Like and to what end? Because again, if you're this mother that was so concerned about your daughter going missing that you need her ashes, you're only willing to give away half of the ashes. I'm like, really? Because what was your behavior that proved that you were that distraught about your daughter being missing? You didn't put up any missing posters. You forgave your husband for killing her. You
And then
forgave
you
your husband
just
for dismembering her. You
100%. And
sat
then you
by
just
and
let it go.
right, you sat by and watched him beat her.
Yeah.
So
And she went missing and you just went, oh, well. And
it's
that was
not
it.
right. There's something that's really not right about her. And again, we'll probably never know and all of the above. But to me, I'm just like, she chills me as much as he does because her behavior and choices are really bizarre.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And hey, I'm with you. I there's a part of me that's like, did she fall down those stairs? I don't think she fell. I bet if she went down those stairs at all, I bet he pushed her.
Yeah.
But I could also see his bullshit fantasy land where he said he wrapped her in that white cloth and he
Yeah.
wrapped her hands and her feet. I could see him because he's known for tying women and girls up. I could see him that being true, that he did tie her hands and feet, did something horrific. And I wouldn't be surprised if he strangled her and then was like, oh, I've gone too far. I've actually killed her. But knew if they found her body, an autopsy would easily point out probably years of abuse,
Yeah.
which, if I had to guess, I mean, uh, if he was anything, if he was the suspect in Meta's case, could have started when she was quite young. But it also could have started around 12 or 13 when he claims she suddenly changed and she was
Right.
suddenly all withdrawn and very different from what she used to be. But
Well, I'll also add that it could have all there is the possibility that he was being abusive, sexually abusive to her from a very young age, but that she did turn when she was 12 or 13. It's also possible that the
yeah,
abuse was going on and then she got to an age where she's like, I don't want to live with this anymore. I don't want to
oh,
deal
a
with this
hundred
anymore.
percent.
She's getting, physically bigger, all of the above. So yeah, it could go either way. I could see it being that he started the abuse at that age, but then also, yeah, I think that the meta element is interesting because then it feels like it's like, I mean, his MO is a little bit all over the place, but again, I think it could go either way. I think it could go either way that either him saying she was changing was just her being starting to like fight back or be
True.
more vocal or whatever, or yeah, he was just saying that when he started the abuse to try and like hide in plain sight.
Oh, easily.
I mean, he could have this again. There's no crime scene. There's no info. So it's like we're
Yeah.
trusting him that she fell down the stairs and broke her neck and that's how
Uh,
she died. He could have taken her out to the barn and premeditated killed her. He
A
could have
hundred
literally just
percent.
made the choice. I'm killing her today. We'll never know.
Oh, I think the only reason he dismembered that body was to hide how she really died
Yeah.
and to hide the abuse that was happening.
Yeah.
Because I don't think it was about, well, I'm going to put her in this barrel and I'm going to whatever. You could have buried her anywhere.
Yeah.
You could have buried her however, but there was a small part of you that knew if she was ever found, they could check the body and they'd be able to see things that he'd done and tell that she was murdered.
Right.
And so I think he was like, well, I'm going to dismember the body because then how are they ever going to know?
Yeah.
And it's true. He did it. Like
He
he
did
got
it.
away with it.
Yeah. For years, he got away with it.
Yeah.
And so again, I
Gross.
just don't think that and the fact that he's so happy to easily change his stories. Yeah, I don't think we'll ever know the truth. I think it could have
No.
absolutely been a planned killing as much as it could have been heat of the moment, as much as it could have been an accident. I think, again, why would we ever trust him? This man is a
Nope.
murderer.
A hundred
He also
percent.
broke into a woman's house, tied her up, and killed her. Like,
Yeah.
there's no reason why we should believe that, like, oh, but he wouldn't have premeditated murdered his own daughter. Like, why?
Right.
Why? There's no reason to believe that.
Oh yeah. I mean, again, you're right. He broke into a woman's home, tied her up, killed her, assaulted her, and then told the police she stabbed herself.
Right.
And then his daughter dies, and he said she broke her own neck.
Right.
So it's everybody. Well, it wasn't him.
Right.
He just happened to be there.
Yeah.
But again, why'd you put the baby on the couch? Why didn't you take the baby upstairs?
Because he knew he was I think he knew what he was doing. It's disgusting. It's
Gross.
disgusting. I also hope this man fucking rots. I think he's a fucking disgusting monster.
Yes. Oh, I hope he lives to a very long life. I'd like him in prison as long as possible, and I hope he's suffering.
I hope he's suffering too. I hope that the rest of them there are all doing what they need to do. I hope somebody has a Netflix account or someone on the outside has told them about the documentary, and I hope that that old man is getting beatings.
Getting beatings.
I do. I'm sorry. I'm
Oh,
sorry. I do.
he's vile.
He's vile. I mean, again, like the shit that he's done, and to your point, also, there's so much more that he's done that
Oh
I'm
yeah.
sure we'll never know
This
about.
isn't it.
This
There's
isn't
no
it. There's
way.
more victims for sure, for sure, for sure. And
Yes,
again, I the meta case, I think it was absolutely him. I mean, it's matches
it
the MO.
feels like it,
Yeah, come on.
right? The fact
Yes.
that he brutally raped and murdered Kathleen Doyle because he was stuck on a ship and wound up for a week and a half.
Yeah.
A week and a half? That you couldn't handle going 2 weeks and then just going home? A week and a half, and you were like, I have to go attack someone.
I mean, again,
Like,
it's wild rationale.
so there
Wild
has to be
rationale.
more. There have to be more out there.
100%. Well, listen, Christy Oxborrow, fantastic work as always. Truly, I found this documentary and this story just so vile but fascinating, and we appreciate your work slugging through the discomfort.
It was an honor.
Oh, listen. And we thank you, dear listeners, for listening to this episode of the show. If you haven't already, give us a follow on the socials on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube at True Crime and Cocktails, on Twitter at Not Detectives. If you'd like some bonus content, go over to patreon.com/True Crime and Cocktails to learn more about our bonus subscription-based service over there. And the only place for official True Crime and Cocktails merch is, of course, truecrewmerch.com. So check that out as well if you're interested. Christy, do you want to tell the people about next week's episode?
On the next True Crime and Cocktails Holiday Hootenanny 5 Dead Men Tell No Tales.
I could not be more excited. Listen, it's always a hoot and a nanny. Good night. Can't be more excited. This is, of course, our, if you're new to the show, this is our yearly tradition. We have a nice, light holiday episode, and this one's coming out on Christmas Eve. So thematic for also anybody
Oh,
who's wanting to get a little bit festive. We're gonna have something coming out for you right before Christmas Day. So keep your eyes open for that. Christy, do you want to say goodnight to the people?
I love that I made it through everything at the beginning and it's now. But good night, sweet fox.
I know. Good night, Fox. Well, here I go.